Okay, folks. So as folks are trickling into the webinar and connecting to their audio, I just have a few announcements. My name is Liz Reed, and I'm head of the Adult Services Department at the Morrill Memorial Library in Norwood, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for joining us for our virtual author event this evening. Huge thanks goes out to a whole slew of Massachusetts libraries and to Haley Booksellers for making tonight's event possible. If you'd like to score your own autographed copies of books from either one of these authors tonight, you can do so at Haley Booksellers website, which I'll pop in the chat in just a moment so everybody can see it. Speaking of the chat, that's how you're going to communicate with the authors tonight, folks. If you have a question, put it in the chat. That question is going to come to me, and I will compile those questions for the end of the evening during the Q&A. So as you think of it, type your question in the chat. If you do like author events and you live locally, we are hoping to have an in-person author event in March. On Monday, March 21st, I know, cross those fingers, we're partnering again with Haley Booksellers to have books on site for Erica Forensic's Girl in Ice, her latest novel. If virtual is more your speed, we are very, oh, look at that. Wonderful.
You just had that sitting right there.
Having an advanced copy. That's great. If you'd rather prefer a virtual program, we are very, very proud to be partnering with the Belmont Library and community and town organizations from Belmont, as well as the Lincoln, Ashland, and Wayland libraries to bring you Sabrina Fulton. Sabrina is Trayvon Martin's mother, and she'll be talking about cultivating justice towards racial equality on Thursday, February 24th at 7 o'clock. You can sign up for those programs and all of our programs at norwoodlibrary.org. So, who are our authors this evening? Tonight, we're joined by Alifair Burke. She's a New York Times bestselling author whose most recent novels include Find Me, released by Harper earlier this month, January 2022. The Better Sister, The Wife, which has been optioned for a feature film by Amazon, and The Ex, which was nominated for the Edgar Award for Best Novel. She has also co-authored best-selling Under Suspicion series with Mary Higgins Clark, and she currently serves as the president of the Mystery Writers of America and is the first woman of color to be elected to this position. A former prosecutor, she now teaches criminal law and lives in Manhattan and East Hampton. You can find out more about Alifair Burke at alafairbburke.com. Also joining us this evening is the Agatha Anthony Daphne McCavity and Mary Higgins Clark award-winning author, Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today bestselling author of 13 novels of suspense. She has also won multiple prestigious awards for her crime fiction, including 5 Agathas, 4 Anthony's, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She's also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV and has won 37 Emmys, 14 Edward R. Murrow Awards, and dozens of other honors for her groundbreaking journalism. National book reviews have called Hank a master at crafting suspenseful mysteries and a superb and gifted storyteller. Hank's novels have been named Best Thrillers of the Year by Library Journal, New York Post, BookBub, Pop Sugar, Real Simple Magazine, and others. Her 2020 thriller is The First to Lie. It garnered a starred review from Publishers Weekly and is a nominee for the Anthony Award for Best Novel and the iconic Mary Higgins Clark Award. And her newest book is Her Perfect Life, a chilling psychological standalone about fame, family, and revenge. It received starred reviews from Kirkus, my personal favorite, and Publishers Weekly, which called it a superlative thriller. So once again, folks, if you have any questions for these two great authors, put them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end of the program. I'm turning things over to Hank.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see you. Wonderful to see you. If I look over here, I'm looking at the comments. So I'm not turning away from you. I'm just seeing how Judy is here and Gail is here, Nicole is here, Marlene is here. So many
Hi,
people
everybody.
at Alafair. Congratulations. Welcome. Congratulations on this.
Thank
marvelous.
you. Thank you so much. And thanks for doing this event with me. And thanks to everybody who's logging in. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names, but also new ones to me. So thank you so much.
It's fantastic. You've had this, your book just came out, and you've had this sort of magical mystery tour with it. Even though has it been totally virtual, or have you had some in-person events, or how are you handling this?
I know it was all looking good. It was all looking good for in person. And then I had to cancel it all kind of at the last minute because of Omicron. So I flew to Houston because one of the mystery books there had kind of too many books pre-ordered for signature, and to ship them would have been kind of crazy. And I was sort of near Houston anyway for vacation. So I got to see McKenna Jordan, who some people may know from Mystery Circles. I got to see her in person, but we didn't do the public event. So she and I just did a virtual discussion on air, but everything else has been virtual. But, thank God for organizations like the library and all these libraries are able to kind of join in and do multiple events. My launch was all indie bookstores, and it was, several indie bookstores together. So, you kind of the downside is you're not seeing people face to face and getting to take selfies and all those things. But, the upside, as you know by now, is there are people who geography, it doesn't really matter, right? So there might be people from very far away who are able to be here tonight with us. So I appreciate that.
It's wonderful to see the numbers and the names pop up. And one of those one of the other silver linings is there's a blizzard about to hit New England. You don't care. It's all fine. We can still talk if it's raining or snowing. And it's wonderful. This book is the buzziest book I have ever heard. Everyone is talking about this. It's sinister, and it's surprising, and it's riveting and compelling and incredibly thought-provoking. And I want you to tell us about the book, because I'm afraid that I'll give something away. So
I know it's always hard. It's so hard to talk about thrillers without giving things away. So this is Find Me, and the person who is asking to be found is a woman who calls herself Hope Miller. She has lived in the same small town for the last 15 years and has kind of become very enmeshed into this kind of small community where everybody knows who she is, and there's no sense of anonymity, and she's kind of dependent on these people who've been taking care of her since she was a very young woman, and she wants to break out on her own. So she moves to a beach town near East Hampton, where I live. So she leaves this small town in New Jersey, moves out to this beach town where she thinks that she can kind of get settled into a place where a lot of people come. It's the kind of place where you can be a stranger and kind of meld into the crowd. And she really wants to be more independent. She moves to East Hampton, and then she disappears. And her best friend, Lindsay, goes looking for her. The thing that's kind of unusual about the search for Hope is that I said she calls herself Hope Miller. The reason why she's been taken care of by this small town in New Jersey is that 15 years earlier, she was found thrown from an overturned SUV with severe injuries. She recovered from her physical injuries, but she never figured out who she was. She was found with no ID, no money, and the car she was in was stolen. And that's really all they ever knew about her. At first they tried to find her. They hoped that her memory would come back. And at some point she had, and part of what I think is intriguing about the book, it's a super pacey thriller. I hope that kind of keeps the pages turning, but it's also sort of an exploration of identity, of how well can you really know yourself if you don't know your past, right? And just the idea that at some point, it's kind of a common trope in books that people are trying to get away from their past. Like people fake their deaths and start over, for example, or they used to live a certain kind of life and they turned a new page and, kind of move into the future as a different person and leave their mistakes behind. Hope literally had to leave her past behind. She didn't really have a choice about it. It was taken from her. And so this idea that at some point, she just stops looking. And at some point you just have to focus, do you keep trying to dig into the past, or you just move forward with your life? And she tried to move forward with her life, but she's kind of just been living in this limbo, right? She's had a pretty good life for 15 years. She has friends, she has people who care about her. But she's kind of still defined by her role in this town. Everybody's like, oh, poor Hope, and everybody kind of knows her story, and she sort of wants to get away from it and start over again. But then when she goes missing, Lindsay has to go looking for her, and that raises questions about, does finding her in the present mean that she also has to dig into her past? And it's kind of a clever, to me, I'm proud of the way, it's kind of a fresh way to approach these questions of, can you leave your...
Oh, Alafair is a little bit frozen. I think she's talking about, it's sort of a way of looking at, can you leave your past behind, which is what happens to Hope, not for any reason of her choosing, but because she loses her memory in this car accident. You froze a little bit when you were talking about the question of, can you...
Okay, I was getting a freeze. I got a freeze on your end. So yeah, I think we have some kind of connection problem. Eek.
Well, it'll all work
go
out.
away.
Well, either of us can fill in for the other one, because I love this book and I know it well. The idea of amnesia is interesting, because as a mystery reader and writer, but as a mystery reader, when somebody has amnesia in a book, I always think, oh, do you really have amnesia?
Right.
It would be so easy, wouldn't it, to pretend to have amnesia? And I know, but if you do have amnesia, how fascinating it would be to realize that you were only who someone else told you were, or your life started when you were at a certain age and there was nothing before that. And how would you know your motivations? How would you know if you were a good person? How would you know anything? Talk a little bit about amnesia and how you are fascinated by it.
Yeah. So I've always been fascinated by memory. I mean, even my college thesis was about the effects of emotion on memory. And as a law professor, I write about wrongful convictions sometimes, including the role that false eyewitness identification can play in that. So I'm super fascinated by memory. But so it's interesting, Hank, that you said, obviously, you're kind of skeptical about somebody who goes, oh yeah, no, I can't remember. It's like, oh, that's convenient.
Yeah.
So there's a few kind of real life cases that kind of sort of worked their fictional way into Find Me. But one of them was a woman in New York several years ago who went missing, and she had gone missing before in fugue states. Like, she would disappear and reappear, not being able to recollect where she had been or what she was doing for those missing days. And while she was missing, and there were, the missing posters up on telephone poles and stuff around the city, there was a spotting of her at her gym, where she had gone to her gym and taken a shower and, used her ID card to check in and out of the New York Sports Club. And, the former prosecutor and me, I was like, girl, she ain't got no, she's not in a fugue state. She's just hanging out, right? I mean, she's avoiding someone's phone call, something. Exactly. I was very skeptical of it, but they found her in the Hudson River alive. But she had another fugue episode, and it's apparently a condition that's more common to women, that it's almost like this form of escape or something from stress or anxiety. But so in the book, I encourage the reader, right, to treat Hope skeptically, because there are other people who do as well, right? So when she first goes missing in East Hampton, and her best friend Lindsay is trying to report it to the police, when the police kind of hear her backstory, they're like, yeah, this sketchy woman conned you all for 15 years, moved out here and probably conned somebody else and like ran off with somebody's car keys or something. Like, they don't really take her to be a sympathetic victim, or the perfect victim, as people call it. But Lindsay, and I think the heart of the book really is their friendship. That what Lindsay knows to her core is that she doesn't know who Hope was before 15 years earlier, but she knows who she is now. And Lindsay knows, like, to every like cellular level in her body, she's like, there is no way Hope would leave without telling me. Like, this would not be voluntary. She would not do this. So it's kind of Lindsay's commitment to that search that I think drives the book. And the trick of writing a book where the main character is missing, right, is the reader kind of has to get to know Hope and hopefully care about whether she's found or not through the eyes of other people, right? So Lindsay's really committed to her, but you meet other characters in the book who have their reasons kind of to maybe be doubtful about her.
I mean, that's one of the things that's one of the many things that's so fascinating about this book, because Lindsay, and this isn't giving one thing away, Lindsay is the person who finds Hope after the car accident and nurtures her and takes care of her and brings her into her family and becomes her instant best friend. And they're very, very connected, for better or for worse. And Hope becomes who she is now by way of Lindsay's caring and nurturing and tight friendship. And that can be lovely and wonderful, or as the reader sort of begins to see, that can be obsessive and controlling.
Yeah, and there've been so many books recently that are about female friendships, but they're almost kind of toxic female friendships. And this, I guess it raises the question of at what point does it become toxic, or you're just extremely close. And the two of them have a reason to be. I think most female friends know that, their squad or their besties or their BFFs, those girlfriends who are kind of like found family. I think most women, if you have other women like that in your life, you understand the unique role they play, to the point that sometimes there's male jealousy, right? That their intimate partners will be like, hey, you care more about that person than you care about me, or why are you always on the phone? Why do you always run to that person when they need you? And so the question between like commitment and sort of unconditional love, like at what point does that become codependency or even obsession? And I think that the two of them, they meet both when they're very young women. Nobody really knows how old Hope is. It's kind of estimated. She was either in her late teens or very early 20s. And Hope was right out of college. Sorry, Lindsay was right out of college on her way home at the end of the semester when she's the one who finds Hope out in the rain. And she thought she was dead at first. I'm not giving anything away. And she literally saves her life. And then, kind of on impulse, jumps into the ambulance with her and kind of becomes her person at the hospital when she doesn't have anybody else. And, they kind of just form this very unusual kind of mutual bond. And Lindsay's always kind of looking out for her. And to some people that explains maybe why Hope would leave. Like maybe when Hope said, I need space and I need to become more independent and I need to finally grow up, maybe what she was trying to say to Lindsay was away from you. Like, maybe she really did want to just start over from scratch. So Lindsay's kind of cut, but again, Lindsay refuses to believe that. It's her kind of commitment to this that drives the search for her.
And you weave that so well in the story, because we as the readers are never quite sure whether their relationship is healthy or not, and whether, as so many people try to tell Lindsay, she's just trying to get away from you, sister. You're smothering her. She feels that she's
just not that into you. Yeah,
she's just not that.
Right, because
she's grateful.
Because friends can ghost each other too, right? I mean, hopefully nobody will ever ghost me, but I have heard about people where it's like something goes wrong and what was a close relationship just falls apart. But
and I don't mean to push you
Lindsay's
on it.
Not having it.
I don't mean to push you on it, but Hope was sort of reborn when Lindsay found her, and it's possible that Hope has just now grown up and she wants to leave the nest and get out from under Lindsay's wing. So your book is about friendship and connections and love and devotion and loyalty, but a lot about people getting what they want, and a lot actually about whether knowing the truth is a good thing. Do we really want to know? Does she really want to know who she is? How did you balance that in the book? Because as an author, you always give us such satisfying, surprising endings. How do you get to that level of satisfaction?
Yeah, I can't give too many spoilers away, but
Just
for
your
it to
thought
be
process.
feasible, and but if anybody's read my books before, they have to be believable. Like, they're very grounded in reality, and I can't take I'm not going to take readers for granted and make them suspend disbelief. And I have this woman with amnesia, so it's got to be believable. But I think the key is that, to me, it's believable, at least, that eventually if you've kind of fallen into this nice life where this small town is kind of taking care of you, you've got this kind of found sister, you've got somebody who gives you a job, you have someone who gives you a place to live, and what the only thing you know about yourself is that you were found in a stolen car, left for dead. If someone else was with you, they left, or you were by yourself driving cross country in a stolen car at a young age, with no money and no ID. And that's kind of a sketchy thing to know about yourself, right? So she, at some level, has to believe that either she was on the run from something, or she was maybe she wasn't a good person. Like, maybe these are things that you'd rather not know. If after a certain amount of time goes by and you're getting frustrated, I think at some point it would make sense to just say, you know what, this is my life now, and I'm just going to move forward, because maybe I don't really want to know what's behind that, closed door.
And you could look at it as, ooh, I win. Whatever terrible thing is in my past, I have eluded it now for whatever reason. And why should I go back and poke that bear and see if I can alert everybody to look, it's me. Another thing that you do so beautifully in the book is talking about what you were saying about making it believable. You really come from it, not only from a legal standpoint, but from this research standpoint that's so fascinating in the book. Because people might be thinking, well, why don't you just get a new identity? Why do you have to rely on someone? And let me just read this really fast, just a tiny little half of a paragraph, which says, over the years, Lindsay, the woman who found hope, Lindsay had researched whether a Jane Doe could establish a legal identity under a new name. She was stunned to learn that it was all but impossible. The scenario wasn't common enough, and concerns about fraud were too strong. The federal government didn't even have a process for tracking unidentified people who were still alive. That was so surprising to me.
Because it's not unheard of that this happens. I mean, I actually read a lot about the to the extent I was able to find information saying that there is no way to track people who are alive but unidentified. They gave examples of people. It's a lot of people who are like homeless with mental illness. They have forgotten who they are, and no one's looking for them apparently, and so they don't have identifications anymore. There's a couple people with amnesia. So these cases do exist, but if you think about it, I mean, I could go change my name to anything tomorrow, but there's a paper trail, right? You would be able to show that Alifair Burke changed her name to somebody else. So your identity is staying constant. It's just the name's changing, right? You can change a lot of things about your identity these days, but you're at least disclosing who you were. With grifters gonna grift, like, there's no way to just start a new identity without knowing who that person used to be, because there's not enough of need for it, and then the potential for abusing it is incredibly high. And so nobody has the institutional incentive basically to fix this kind of gap, and so these people live in limbo. And there's a comparison to the book to some extent of people who live in those countries without legal status, for example. They know who they are, right? But they're unrecognized by the government because of the personal risk to them. And so Lindsay's kind of living in this limbo where, she calls herself Hope Miller, but she doesn't have a driver's license. Her car is registered in Lindsay's name. Her credit card is Lindsay's credit card. And that's what I mean by she's literally dependent on these other people. And then you kind of have to wonder, like, okay, why does Lindsay allow that? What is she getting out of it? Is it purely out of love and generosity that she's doing this, or does she love being needed? that person who like loves to be needed. Like, does Lindsay kind of have a little bit of that going on? It's kind of for the reader to sort of, peel those layers away and see what they conclude about that without giving too much away. Oh, and it also makes it harder. It makes it harder to find hope as well, right? So if you went missing, I know what I would do to look for you. But you would look to see, you would put an APB out on the license plate number, right? Like be on the lookout for you. You would look at charges on the credit cards, those kinds of things. But Lindsay, Hope doesn't have any of those things. And so it makes it harder for Lindsay to find her. So like at some point, Lindsay kind of thinks out loud about whether she should report her car stolen, because Hope's car is under Lindsay's name. So Lindsay could just report the car stolen, and that would get the police to look for the car. But then when they're not going to be looking for her as a missing person, they're going to be looking for her as someone who stole a car. So then when they stop her and she has to explain, I don't have a driver's license, things could just go downhill really fast. And so kind of it makes it trickier for Lindsay to look for her.
But see, it makes it so much fun for you as a crime fiction author and as a lawyer who knows the system to be able to write something. And that's what makes the book feel so real and so possible, because you have thought of everything that the reader will have thought of, and you handle that and say, nope, that won't work because of this. Nope, that won't work because of this. And which leads you're turning the pages as fast as you possibly can to see how this could possibly end. Another cool thing about this book is that I insist this is a standalone, but your fans, and there are hundreds of people here right now who have read your other books, will know that there's at least one character, if not more, in this book who come from your other works. Talk a little bit about that. And it's such a cool thing, Alafair, that you did that. It makes her seem even more real than Ellie Hatcher, who I'm talking about. Ellie Hatcher seemed to before. Talk a little bit about that magic there.
Yeah, it's funny. So all of my books, they coexist in the same world. It's kind of, Michael Connelly's, not to compare myself to Michael Connelly, except in this one regard, right? He's got his LA, right? And the characters, all coexist, and sometimes they show up in each other's stories. Harlan Coben does the same thing with his New Jersey. And my books, whether anyone has noticed it or not, like they all exist in the same New York. So, my standalone novels, The Wife, and The Better Sister, they're all standalones, but there is one character, Olivia Randall, who appears in all three of them. But nobody ever kind of, I don't think, saw them as a series. They're kind of related thematically, but they're all standalones. So I actually consider it a huge compliment to Ellie Hatcher that when she appears in this book, the people who know about Ellie Hatcher are like, it's an Ellie Hatcher book. And I'm like, well, it's not really an Ellie Hatcher book, but she is in it. And that's probably all I think it's on the book jacket that the tie to it is the tie to Ellie Hatcher. For those of you who've read those books, I promise you do not need to have read them to read this book. It's a standalone. But when Lindsay goes looking for Hope, she tracks her down to this house that's for sale, that she was helping some kind of fringy real estate agent under the table, like stage his open houses. And Lindsay finds what she thinks is a little blood stain, and kind of manipulates a police officer.
No, you can't tell this part. Oh! I refuse to let you tell this part because it was so much fun to find that. It was
okay.
All right. And I want you, every single one of you, to get this book from Haley Booksellers or get it from the library and find out for yourself what happened, because it's so cool. Alafair is just amazingly cool. So how did you decide to put?
And then things happen, and then Ellie shows up.
Yeah. So, but Ellie, how did your idea of weaving Ellie into this book fill something that you wanted for Ellie, and why isn't it in Ellie's own book? And how did you decide to make it's not an Ellie Hatcher book, but it's an Alifair Burke book? And that's very cool.
Well, I like a book that's full of a lot of characters and isn't necessarily about one person. That's like a very big canvas. And without saying too much, I had this book, right, that eventually, you might want to find out. Well, I don't know how I say things. I always say brains are magic. Like some of the best ideas come to me of like my book, The Wife, for example, which I love, I had one character's backstory for a really long time, but I kind of didn't know what to do about it. Like I didn't really want it to be a book on its own, but I thought it was really interesting. And then I had the idea of, a woman whose husband gets accused of sexual abuse and she doesn't know whether to believe him or not, but that's only interesting if she's interesting. And I was like, oh, what if she's the woman with that backstory? And then it's kind of like those old commercials of you put your peanut butter in my chocolate, you got a Reese's peanut butter cup out of it. This was one of those things. There's, there was kind of something I knew about this book, and then there was something I knew about Ellie, and I was kind of like, oh, and then that's kind of when I decided they belonged together.
I mean, it's interesting. Yeah. Writer brains are so fascinating. Sometimes I think about it like a Rubik's cube, that if you look at it one way, it's nothing, but you go and you turn it, and suddenly at some point something happens and you think, oh, that's how those pieces go together.
Yeah, well, we were talking earlier. I think we're all puzzle. A lot of readers are puzzle buffs too, I think. And it's kind of like a puzzle. Like, it's hard to explain, but I almost do kind of think of it spatially. Like, it is that idea of if I turn this will click into place. And I know it's one of those things where you try to explain how the sausage is made and it doesn't. I don't know if these analogies are very apt or not. But I will say the book does have a lot of characters in it, but I promise it all makes sense. And you got to trust me. Everything will land in place.
This is a book full of sleight of hand and full of spinning plates, but so easy to read and so instantly immersive to read. Talk about making the sausage. There is no sausage making visible in this book. It's seamless and glorious and really a page turner. And I love how you mix this. You're such a good friend. You have so many good friends, and you have this wonderful heart for your dogs and your husband and your life. And you mix that experience of how happy you seem to be and what a strong, tough, knowledgeable lawyer you are. And that's sort of the essence of an Alifair Burke book, smart and optimistic and full of heart. Talk a little bit about how all of that fits into your writing. Do you think about...
That's very complimentary. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, it's hard to explain. It's unless I'm intentionally writing an unlikable character, like someone is supposed to be a big jerk, I tend to want my books to be people I like or that other people will like, because it's more fun to write about people I care about, and it's easier to care about them if I like them. So I actually always think my characters are pretty likable unless they're not supposed to be. But I've kind of been surprised at the kind of the trend of, everybody talking about whether female characters in particular are likable or not on the page. I'm always kind of surprised when people are like, oh yeah, Alifair Burke has written some really great unlikable characters you can root for. And I'm like, who's unlikable? Because I find them quite captivating, and I'm like, maybe you hate me too. I don't know.
They're complex.
They're not perfect. They're just not perfect, right? So I always hate that idea that somebody, just because they're complicated, if it's a woman, they're unlikable or something. And I do think, because I don't think all of my female characters have always been kind of in sort of, I don't want to say the word tough, but sort of challenging professional jobs. Yeah. I never know if that's part of it too. If somebody has a job that kind of requires them to occasionally have an edge, if that complicates their likability. But to me, it doesn't. I think Olivia Randall, for example, is a great friend. When I write about her and her best friend talking together, I'm like, that's how my friends and I talk to each other, with each other. But when she needs to be aggressive, she knows how to be assertive and aggressive. And I don't see I like it that you emphasize that my characters tend to be both of those things. They're actually kind of loving, kind people, but they can also be pretty tough when it's warranted.
Well, they're confident. I mean, and that's one of the things that comes through. And so in these characters, I love how you weave your legal knowledge into the characters. There are scenes where one of the characters, is just, she's I don't want to give anything away. This is so hard, you all. We're talking about a book that has so many, pitfalls of giving things away. But when women find their own strength and when they find their own power, when they decide what they want and that they're going to fight the battle to get it, you shine at that. But you need to have the underpinnings to write that. You need to have the legal underpinnings to make it be seamlessly realistic. Do you write about the law because you love it? Could you think you could have done this without being a lawyer?
I think so. I mean, I think to some extent, I don't even realize I do it. It's like if you suddenly had a book, as you often do, right, where the person has your job or they're set in the media world, like there's just stuff organically that it doesn't feel like research or work to you. It's just stuff that winds up on the page. And so, Lindsay is a lawyer, but she doesn't do that much lawyering in this book. Like she's not in court, for example, most of the book or anything like that. But it's just her two things. She knows how criminal justice works, right? So she can, if the police are trying to shine her on, she knows that. Like she's not gullible in that sense. So she kind of knows how things work. But she's also just smart. Like, I mean, she looks at things super analytically and is able to problem solve in a way that's just how her brain works. So she's pretty smart.
And also and sort of the emotional IQ. I mean, there's someone in the book, and I don't want to give it away, says there's formal law and then there's the way things actually work. And you bring that to bear so beautifully in this, because there are law enforcement people and there are lawyers in this book, obviously, but there's also reality in this book. There's ethical truth and moral truth and emotional truth, not just legal truth.
Yeah, there's the workarounds. I always tell people, like, if you get a parking ticket, you don't hire like a Supreme Court litigator for that. You find the person who knows how to get the parking ticket to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another part in this book where, and I am talking about your writing and about your legal background. There's a moment in the book where someone talks about feeling the boom when they understand what the book is. Do you use an outline? Do you know where this is going? How did this book come together for you? I know we were talking about the Rubik's Cube, but did it take a long time? Was it in process for a long time? Did you know the ending and the beginning and not the middle? How does that work for you? And was this unusual?
Yeah, this book took me longer to write than I started it and then put it down a few times because I had a different idea. So I kind of decided to do that trilogy of books that were all about women in their family roles. So the ex, the wife, and the better sister were, women put in a tricky situation by virtue of their identity as that family member, right? And this one kind of kept getting built onto, I would say. But I think that the two things that really made the book work for me, at least, when I first started it, the person looking for hope was not her friend Lindsay. Oh. It was somebody who was more of had a professional investigatorial role from that town in New Jersey. And Lindsay was just her friend who cared about her. And I was like, oh no, it's got to be that Lindsay has to be the one looking for her without any help. And then there has to be a reason nobody will help her. And so that kind of that started to build more layers onto hope and their friendship. And then the piece about Ellie Hatcher of kind of pulling in that component of it. And then I was like, okay, this is the next book. That'll be the one I do next. So, and now it's done.
I love that. I just love that. There's a moment when you know that you have it right. And I wonder, I'm looking at the comments here, so many comments. Are you all in book clubs people who are here tonight? If you are in a book club, you must get Find Me for your book club. There are so many questions that are book club perfect.
It's a really good book club book. I wouldn't say that about all my books, but this one's a really good book club book. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Yeah.
Tell me do you have book club questions that people can go?
I do. On my website, I do. The 3 W's, alafairbburke.com. If you go to the Find Me page, there are book club questions there.
I mean, it's interesting. They, for my books, they ask me to write the questions. And when I have to write, when I get to write book club questions, it makes me look at my own book in a different way and makes me think about what it is that someone might wonder about it or think about it. Did anything come up to you when you saw your questions, or did you write them? And how did that change how you looked at the book?
Yeah, and I feel like these events that I do with other people, it's almost like having a graduate seminar on your own book over and over and over again. And sometimes you see things like, oh, right, you kind of realize what your book is really about. So I think that some book club questions, like the traditional, kind of the fun ones, are like, who would you cast in these roles and things like that. But I think the best thing about a book club book with a thriller or a mystery is hearing other people's theories about, what did you think, what surprised you, what didn't surprise you. Hopefully everything surprised you. But I'm always surprised, like and please do not put this, if you've already read the book, do not put anything in the chat. But when I hear from readers sometimes about what they thought was going to happen, 90% of those were things, of course, that I thought about, of like, oh yeah, you were kind of supposed to think that, or that. But every once in a while, they'll have like the thing that they thought was going to happen. I was like, whoa, where did you get that?
I wish I would have thought of that. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I love how people's brains work. I love that. And I also think that a good book club question for this book is to ask yourself about your own friends, and how far would you go for your own friends, and how well do you really think you know them, what they are on the outside versus what you project onto them.
Yeah, although if you're in the book club with the friends you're talking about, I guess that could be an awkward conversation. Oh yeah, if you went missing, I would not look for you. Probably nobody's going to admit that. But no, they're just a question. I do think that people will want to. I think there will be scenes in the book where Lindsay is kind of being pressed by other people about her attachment to Hope that will ring true to people, that will remind them of their personal friendships as well.
And going back to the Ellie, Lindsay, Hope connection, and I don't want to give anything away about that. So in order to sort of bring that to the fore, I always think about what from an author's past went into the books. Just you were talking about being a reporter, being a lawyer, but East Hampton and Wichita play roles in this book. Where did those come from in your life?
Having the juxtaposition of Hope kind of knowing small towns, having been in this small town and kind of yearning for something bigger than that, but not feeling quite up to something like New York City, for example, but she thinks that maybe like a beach town out on the East End might be a good fit for her. I think that kind of longing for something more is I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. No disrespect to Wichita, Kansas, but kind of longing for something more, but, also kind of feeling insecure and, a little bit of a fish out of water when I would go to bigger cities or, different kind of places on the coasts and things like that. Now obviously I live in New York, so I guess I've gotten over my insecurities about leaving a smaller place. Ellie Hatcher's character is very much from that too. She lived in Wichita, Kansas, and then moved to New York. And so I think that part of it, kind of those ambitions of like thinking there's something bigger out there, but also being a little bit afraid of pursuing it. Yeah. I think that's very much from my own psyche.
Well, I grew up in Indianapolis, so it's sort of a similar Midwest upbringing situation. I completely understand that. But you were in Wichita when BTK was on the prowl.
I was. So there was a serial killer that some of you might be familiar with who called himself BTK, which stood for Bind, Torture, and Kill, which are not three great words to hear next to each other when you're a little kid. And I think that was I think no criticism to my parents. I love my parents, but I think like most parents would have turned the TV off and maybe tried to shield a fourth grader from that kind of knowledge. But mine did not. So, and in fact, my dad would actually talk to me about it. We basically like do amateur FBI profiles of who we thought the killer was going to be. And like, I probably spent way too much time thinking about BTK as a kid. And I do think, and I say this seriously, it was kind of around that age when, my mom was a public librarian, shout out to the school librarian, sorry, but would take me to the public library on weekends. And it was around that time that I got really into mysteries. Like I always wanted to read like mystery stories. So she was always trying to find kind of age appropriate mystery novels for me. And I think a lot of crime writers say kind of the appeal of crime fiction to people. And I think sometimes, especially women, is like, it's scary and dangerous, but you kind of know that at the end, there'll be some kind of resolution. Like maybe it won't be justice or a happy ending necessary, but you will get answers. It's apparently why women all watch Law and Order. Like I read some article about the psychological examination of why everybody who watches Law and Order repeats, but it's this idea of having closure at the end and that kind of resolution. And I almost wonder if like, as this scary guy was running around the city killing women and children, actually, I'm almost wondering if what I was finding in those books was like this search for an answer, like, to kind of know that there would be a resolution. And he didn't get caught for 30 years. And even after I was a lawyer, like the first, like when the internet first became the internet and those true crime message boards, like that would be my late night rabbit hole of like BTK and looking at the cold cases and which cases probably were his that hadn't been linked to his signature. And so, yeah, I mean, that was kind of an obsession of mine growing up.
But I love that because this is obviously why you turned out the way you turned out with an with an analytical mind.
Obsessed by crime.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fruitcake. With an analytical mind, searching for answers, wanting some justice, wanting a satisfying solution, wanting to make everybody be okay. And when I grew up, my father and I would watch Perry Mason together. He was a lawyer.
Yeah.
We watched Perry Mason together, and I would always guess what would happen. And, I would say, what does immaterial mean? Well, why does he object? Why is this? And learned about the law and about, mysteries from Perry Mason.
Yeah. We used to, my dad and I would watch, we watched, Beretta and Barnaby Jones.
Well, this shows you I'm 20 years older than you are, and there you have it by way of television. I mean, it's so interesting though, because a mystery author's mind works in a certain way, and all of your fans who are here tonight are wanting the answers, and they power through your books knowing that you're going to give them a marvelous story like Find Me, with a satisfying but surprising ending. I mean, it's just quite astonishing. I know we have a lot of questions, but I saw one from Sharon, who says, "Hi, Alafair, this is my first introduction to you. Yay, and thank you, Hank." Oh, you're welcome. "Would you say Find Me is a good start for me?" asks Sharon. What do you think about that? I say yes.
I think so. Yes, because it's a standalone. And I will say, you never can assess your own books, but I feel like, to the extent I love getting, and I know you do too, reader, tweets and Instagram responses and things like that. But more than I think any other book I've written, the thing I keep hearing from people over and over again is that they read it in one sitting. Like that once they started reading it, like it just goes super fast. So hopefully it will be addictive for people.
Well, I can tell you that I put books to the treadmill test. I read books on the treadmill. That's why this is so battered up and open. So I have like hair clamps holding it onto the treadmill holder. And my treadmill test is, how long is it before I look at my watch to see how much time I have to ride this thing? And I think it was an hour in reading this book before I even thought,
oh, wow.
Oh, just so rivetingly good. So you aced the treadmill test, and that is as good as it gets. I have one more question, and then we'll toss it back to Liz.
So basically,
but I want all of your fans know about your dogs, know about Spelling Bee, know about your wonderful circle of friends.
Looking for my dogs.
Oh, are they there? Can we see? Are they hiding?
I know, I'm trying to find them. I mean, they're never hiding. They're always on the couch. Although you might find up seeing my laundry bag. I was folding laundry before we.
You're so good.
Okay, there's Double. There's Franny.
Hey,
You
Franny.
see them? And that little white blob on the carpet is a dog.
Oh, I see.
Double.
I see. Oh, that's so cute.
He's camoufloged.
I have to look really hard. I still haven't gotten used to that. Oh, here we go. Hi, sweetheart. Oh,
how do I get any work done? She comes and, like, if I'm typing, Hank, she takes her nose and she hits my wrists, like, to pet her.
Of course. My cat Lola used to do that too. She would come up and, like, bat my hand and say, like, pet me.
Oh yeah. I'm like, how am I supposed to work? How am I supposed to work? Yeah.
Isn't that so amazing though, that they know to do that? And she must love you so much.
She likes to get pet. Yes, she does love me, but she also just likes to have pets.
And just for 2 seconds, tell us about, I'm a big fan of the Spelling Bee as well. And I follow your exploits on Spelling Bee. You're always getting Queen Bee and getting all of the words in the word search. Why do you all do Spelling Bee? I hope you do.
Oh my God. So many writers are in the Spelling Bee. Laura Lippman's also really into it. Janelle Brown, Angie Kim. I think there's a whole, like, Venn diagram, like, of Twitter on people, Twitter, of people who are either writers and Spelling Bee overlap. But I hate to say it, this is not the most complimentary thing. The election, like, Tracy Flick, Reese Witherspoon's character, like,
Sure.
she had to be first. She had to have A's and be first in her class and win and everything. There's something about so we're talking about the New York Times Spelling Bee, and you have to find these. It's like Boggle. You've got to find all these words. But if you think about it, like, you find a few words and it tells you you're nice, good, great, amazing, then you're a genius. And I used to just stop at genius, be like, I'm a genius. But then I found out, Laura Lippman is the one who told me that if you get every single word, you are Queen Bee. So that is now the goal, is you have to find every single word. And you were talking about obsession, Hank. Let's just say it can be a little obsessive, but this is where friends come in, because it's kind of difficult to Queen Bee every day by yourself. So I have a group of friends who all give each other hints. So even if you're missing a word, somebody else might have it. So we kind of cheat.
Oh, that's not cheating, that's collaborating.
Yes, but, like, sometimes the hints are pretty strong. Like, it's a 5-letter word that begins with CHI.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
okay, got it.
At some point, you just have to be done so you can get back to your work. So,
and I think genius is just fine. This is what I've said to myself as well. If I can get to genius,
just stop at genius.
Yeah,
that is the healthy thing to do.
I think that's a good title.
Stop at genius.
Just stop at genius. I love that.
I call it minimal genius. Minimal genius, meaning just stop when you hit genius. Don't waste any more time. Because the problem is, if you even find, like, 3 more words, then you feel like, or they should have a next level of praise, like super genius.
Or else
the distance.
You're so close. You're so close. So close to Queen Bee. Do you all know what we're talking about? We are just like
no, I'm sure they're just like, you're being so. The people who know. The people who don't are like, stop talking about this stupid puzzle.
I know that readers love word games. There's no question about that, because what is a book but a word game? A big word game, a big word puzzle. And congratulations on putting together the puzzle of Find Me. So
thank you so much, Hank.
It is quite wonderful. Liz, I know we have lots of questions and I'm trying to ignore them to let you ask them. So take it away. Let's hear what the audience has to say. And thank you so much, audience, for being here.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And thank you, Hank. And thank you, Liz, for hopping back on.
Yeah, thank you both for your time this evening. This is great. We have hundreds of people here tonight from not only across Massachusetts, but across the country. I'm seeing people throw their state in the chat. So we have Alabama here tonight, we have Minnesota. Somebody said they were from the UK. That's so cool. You must be sleepy. And I think we have a lot of crossover in the fan base between you two as well, because we have a lot of people who ask questions of both of you.
Yay!
So many people are fascinated about your writing process. for both of you, especially since you both have successful careers outside of authorship. So what was the spur? Like, what was the spark? How did you get into writing to begin with? Like, how did you get those first few novels, into fruition?
Alafair, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'll start. So I'm the opposite of like what most people say, like they wanted to be writers and their parents made them become something like a lawyer. My dad wanted me to be a writer. My dad is a writer. And I think because I was being told from the time I was a little kid, like, you're a natural writer, you're going to be the writer, another writer in the family. I'm like, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. So I became a lawyer, but one obsessed with crime. I became a prosecutor. But I was always a big reader, and I was always a reader of crime fiction. And at some point I just kind of noticed that, with only a couple of exceptions, usually when a lawyer, particularly a prosecutor, shows up on the page of a book, it's like you can skip the next 5 pages. It's just going to be boring. Nothing's going to happen. They're just going to yell hearsay and objection at people and like just skip it. And I was kind of like, no, my job is actually really cool. Like there's this kind of rhythm to the courthouse, this kind of hum. There's the way cops talk to each other that's different than the way they talk on the stand, and the way prosecutors talk to witnesses. Like I just thought I had something to maybe add. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and like there really weren't any mystery novels kind of set there. And so I became one of those lawyers who thought like, someday I'll write a book. And then when I left the DA's office, I took a summer off. I thought if I'm ever going to start that book, I guess I should start it now. And I thought I would just be a law professor who wrote one novel, that was set in my old office. And when my agent sold it, he's like, oh, good news is lots of people want it, but they all assume it's a series. This is part of a series. I'm like, do they want it to be part of a series? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And I'm like, yes, it's definitely a series. And I definitely planned it that way. So I kind of like, I'm like, okay, I'll write a couple more. And then I wrote a couple more and a couple more. And it's been 18 years, which I still kind of can't believe. But I'm basically, I only teach in the law school one semester of the year now. So Hank, how about you?
Well, it's interesting. When you said it's been 18 years, I'm trying to do math about how long that's been. I grew up,
2003.
yeah, it's a little bit longer than I've been writing, I guess, a little bit longer. As I was saying, I grew up in really rural Indiana, and my sister and I would ride our ponies to the library to get books. And I would read up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house, and read every single Sherlock Holmes novella and short story that there could possibly be. And I love those. And I love trying to figure out, the answer before Conan Doyle told us the answer. And I learned about sort of this rhythm of writing, that there's a music to a mystery and character development and clues. And then I remember reading Murder on the Orient Express. And I would think I was probably about 12. And I thought, how did she do that? How did she figure out that amazing ending? No spoilers. And then I thought, maybe I want to be a mystery writer. And then I thought, no, I think I want to be a detective. I'd rather like be Sherlock Holmes than write about Sherlock Holmes. And so I became long, weavy story, but finally I became a journalist in the early 70s. And not until I was 55, one day I had a good idea for a book. It's too long to tell, but I just knew it was a good idea, that feeling that Alifair was talking about, the magic. And I came home and said to my husband, I've got a great idea. I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to write a mystery. I have this. And Jonathan said, do you know how to? Great. He's like, super, honey. Do you know how to write a book? And I'm like, how hard can that be? How hard can that be? I mean, I seriously said those words, and I remember how naive I was about it. But I knew it was a good idea, and that turned out to be Prime Time, which won the Agatha for Best First Novel. And that was the beginning of my crime fiction career. But it shows you how that idea, just as Alafair was saying, when Find Me came together, that when you know something is a good idea, you just know. And I was just compelled to do it. I guess I'm the poster child for starting your career, a second career in midlife, right?
That's amazing.
some of the audience and myself are both very, very entertained by the idea of Hank with her satchel of books, riding home with a
Yeah.
boat.
Picturing you in a barn. I was like,
So actually, some folks are wondering about the nitty gritty, actually, the writing process itself. Do you ever have sort of a friend to bounce plot ideas off of? Do you know, make it a habit to definitely write every day? What is it like a day in the life of the author, I suppose?
Hank, do you want to?
Okay, so I'm going to really confess to you that after working in television, I've been a television reporter for 43 years, which is insane. And when I started, and that's a very collaborative process. And every story that I wrote, I would have an editor and my producer, and then the boss of him, and then the boss of her, and everybody would look at it and change it and fix it and tweak it. Can it be shorter, longer, more investigative, less investigative, more featurey, whatever it was. So when I started writing books, I thought, I don't care what anybody else says. I'm just doing this, and I'm not going to ask anyone, and I'm not going to show it to anyone, and I'm not going to talk about it to anyone. And I'm really, really a solitary writer. When I finish the manuscript and send it to my editor, then the big collaboration comes in again. My editor is a genius. She knows things about me and my books that I have no idea, I would never think of. You know, she'll say, oh, I love this book about redemption. And I'm like, yeah, redemption. That's totally what it's about. And we work very carefully together, but I don't have a group of my pals, and I don't ask them about my books or about my plot, because is this okay? I mean, I just think I know, and I don't want to do what they think. I want to do what I think. Is that terrible?
No, I'm the exact same way, so it better not be terrible because we're both awful. I don't let anyone see it till I hit the end, basically, but then I'm very open. Like at that point, I just have to build the bones by myself, because I think the problem is you don't want someone in your ear telling you what your book's about when you're still figuring it out, right? And they're you know, I've heard people say like a book is, you know, our book when we're done doesn't even really exist. It's not till you guys read it, right? When you read it, you're filling in things in your head. You're deciding what that person looks like. We've given you some idea of what they look like, but you imagine it visually as you read, right? You picture the room that they're in as around the few words I use that describe that, right? You make it cinematic. If you have other people bouncing that, you know, echoing that's kind of their internalization of your book at you while you're still writing it, it's like they become a weird partner in it. And I need to just write it. Once it's done and people want to like tell me something, then I can hear it, reflect on it, decide whether to use that note or not, or how to use it. But it's not affecting what I did in the first place, if that makes sense. The one place where I think it's different is, so I have co-authored 6 novels with Mary Higgins Clark before she passed away in January 2020, sorry. But, you know, obviously that was a collaboration. So we really did have to talk through the whole story to begin with. And we almost kind of had our own writer's room, basically, like the way TV shows and movies are written. It's like we would talk out every single character, all the motivations, all the twists, and basically have it all thought out before we were even writing. And then we would write and pass pages back and forth. And so she and I collaborated really well together in that respect, but I can't, you know, I think that's pretty unusual. I'm not somebody who like does writer groups or anything like that, but.
I wanted to ask you about Mary Higgins Clark, because what a joy it must have been for you to,
yeah.
I mean, what the goddess of us all, the person who got us, so many of us started in writing this kind of novel. What was it, if I could ask you, what was it like to work with her? She's so lovely, and she's
I know.
Such a hard worker.
I consider myself extremely lucky to have had that experience, but I kind of still have to pinch myself, and I'm like, oh, I wrote 6 novels with the Queen of Suspense, Mary Higgins Clark. But I mean, she was just phenomenal. I mean, she would, you know, I write in like my pajamas even half the time. Like I am wearing athleisure from the waist down and have no shoes on. Like I'm a ragamuffin when I write, and she's like impeccable. We would meet for our writing meetings, and I was just like, I cannot believe I'm in your presence. Like I would have to get dressed up. But she would sit down, she could work me under the table. And, she was, in her 80s when we first started working together. I would get like enough done for the day, and I'd be like, oh, this is a really good start. And she's like, no, we can keep going. Like, next page. Like,
she had such a marvelous.
But it was, I think what we had in common is we kind of, when we first met each other to talk about potentially collaborating, you kind of have to talk about your process. And I think the thing that clicked for both of us is we don't start with plot first. It's character. Like, and then you kind of find the plot that suits that character's circumstances or whatever their flaw is or whatever their, vulnerability is. And so I think that's when we thought we could work together. But, by the time, once we had done a couple of books together, it was almost like this shared brain. Like when we would get together for the writing meetings, like I would be writing as fast as I could just to keep the notes down, because you know how, Hank, when you're thinking through a problem, you'll kind of get so far and be like, oh, that might be a problem, but I can figure that out tomorrow. I've got enough to write today, right? Because we couldn't do that, right? We had to work through it. We couldn't just always wait till tomorrow to figure out what we were going to do. Like if I would get us so far, and then I might be like, oh, but that could be a problem because of this. And then she would kind of, it's almost like the baton. She would be like, oh, but if we change this, then and then kind of talk that out. And then I'd be like, and then this could happen. And it's kind of like those cubes turning that we were talking about. It's kind of like each of us was taking a turn at the Rubik's Cube and kind of tumbling it into place together. So pretty magical stuff. Yeah.
What a treasure. What a memory. Amazing.
Yeah. I finished that, the book that she was still sending we were still exchanging pages like 3 days before she passed away. And, after a considerable amount of time had passed, it was kind of decided that I would go ahead and finish the book, kind of get it over the finish line. But it was, kind of bittersweet to finish it without her, but luckily we had talked it all out.
What a joy to do that. And, how proud she must have been of you, and how sort of relieved that her stories would continue to be told.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we yammered. Liz, do we have more questions?
We do. Do you still have a few more minutes for us?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. There was one question that was directed to Alafair, but I actually want to expand it out to both of you. So when you were talking about Wichita, Alafair, somebody asked if you've ever written about BTK. And what I'm wondering is, have either one of you ever based a character around a real life criminal? Or is there a case or a series of cases that you would never, ever touch in a book?
Go ahead, Alafair.
So I haven't written specifically about the person who was identified and prosecuted for being BTK, but it's kind of a long story. I know we're short on time. I wrote his lawyers a letter about the potential of interviewing the lawyers, because they were basically my age and grew up in Wichita also. And I was kind of like intrigued by the idea of like, you're basically now defending the guy that we were all terrified of when we were little kids. And of course, they're busy public defenders, and they gave my mail to him. And so he wrote me a letter from jail that was super creepy. And he had obviously been very flattered by the attention he had gotten from an author and a law professor. And I was like, I don't want any of that. And so I kind of pressed myself, like, why am I interested in him? Like, his case is not that interesting. He's a dumb, like, who, it's ridiculous he didn't get caught earlier. And I was like, it's really the impact that it had on this community. My parents moved me to Wichita, Kansas from Southern Florida, where we had a beach. Kansas didn't have a beach, so I was not happy. And Andy Gibb lived in Florida. Yeah. He did not live in Kansas. So I did not want to leave Kansas, did not want to go to the beach, the beachless Andy Gibbless place. And then they're like, oh, but it's nicer and safer, and we'll have a nicer house. Like all these words people use that like, this is going to be a better place for you to grow up. And then we're like unpacking the moving boxes, and they're like, oh, there's a BTK running around, like torturing people to death. And I'm like, hey, good move, you guys. Let's go. Let's go back to chaotic Southern Florida. I'm fine with it there. But it's this idea of like this town was convinced that they were like living in the safe place. And I'm like, you're not in the safe place. Like, and they'll be afraid to go to New York City because New York City is so dangerous. I'm like, have you not noticed that like your neighborhood is a crime scene? Like, and so I think it was the impact of like just how we grew up, of being raised. Like, we would check the phone lines as soon as we got home to make sure that they hadn't been cut. And we grew up with bolts on our basement doors because like people might come in through the basement and kill you in the middle of the night. And that was just kind of accepted as normal. And so I kind of made that part of Ellie Hatcher's backstory, that she grew up in a town where there was a serial killer, and her dad was the detective who kind of became obsessed with finding him and never solved the case. So I kind of found a way to write about him indirectly, or kind of the impact of that on a community. Hank, what about you?
And we wonder why Alafair turned out the way she turned out, and why her books turned out.
Checking the phone lines.
Yeah, we get this. I mean, what an experience. What a crazy, unsettling, disturbing, formative experience. But you have made that into lemonade, I have to say. Very, very, very nicely. You know, as a reporter who's sort of trying to stand up for the little guy and stand up for the good guy, my husband is a criminal defense attorney, again, sort of standing up for the little guy, standing up for the good guy. So it's really wonderful for me to be married to an attorney, because it's great to have in-house counsel when I'm writing my books. So one of the things that I've learned from Jonathan's cases and from my stories is that there's so much underneath that we never hear about motivation and possibilities. And as Alafair was talking about, convictions that are wrong or things that are missed, or just so a couple of Jonathan's cases are not, my books are not my husband's cases made into fiction, and they are not my investigations made into fiction. But again, the Rubik's Cube of a little bit of, you know, one of Jonathan's really grisly, sinister murder cases, a little bit of one of my stories, a little bit of about being on a jury. You know, I hear Jonathan talking about a case, for instance, and he'll tell me the story of the case. And I'll say, oh yeah, honey, you know, this is a slam dunk acquittal. There's no question. This is a not guilty. You got a not guilty. Absolutely. And then I think about the prosecutor telling his wife or spouse about the same case, you know, and does he or she say, slam dunk conviction, you know, you got this. And it makes me think about truth, and it makes me think about justice, and it makes me think about, you know, I remember saying to Jonathan, there's 3 sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And that's what created the book, Trust Me. That's where that came from. So the idea of justice, and the idea that this justice system is about individual people and individual stories. And that's what really motivates me in my books.
You know, you see sometimes at the end of a show or end of a movie, any appearance to real life people or places is purely coincidental. Has anybody ever come to, you know, approach to either of you to say, hey, hang on a second, that looks an awful lot like so-and-so or such and such a case, or something like that?
Not to me, because it just isn't, you know, sometimes it's hard to believe, but it's just truly fiction. It's little bits of our lives, you know, amalgamated together and tweaked and polished and changed to be something utterly different.
Yeah, my first book was loosely based on a case that I worked on a little bit at the DA's office when I was there. But it was very, very fictionalized, but it was set in the office where I worked. So everybody was kind of convinced like that this person was that guy. And I think they had quite a bit of fun trying to like say who the co-workers were. And I, of course, refused to answer any of their questions. I'm like, it's all made up.
All right, just bringing it back one final time to Mary Higgins Clark. Alafair, could you shout out the title of the project you were working on with her? Someone wants to know that.
So the book that I finished that we had basically, you know, I just kind of completed it, and it's called Peace in My Heart, which was out in 2020. And then I'm working on a sequel right now that we had started to a sequel to Where Are the Children?
Oh,
actually.
wow.
So, and that will be out next year.
Will you come back and talk to us here at the library about
Sure.
Where the Children? I'd love to talk with you about that.
Yeah.
Wow, that'll be so much
Yeah,
fun.
that'll be exciting.
Liz, I just invited Alafair, sorry.
I was like, apparently Hank runs the programming.
And I know Haley Booksellers will be very happy to handle this.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I think with that, I think we're going to wrap things up. Thank you so much for staying with us this whole time and staying engaged and asking questions all the way through. And thank you to Hank and to Alafair.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.
It's just been great.
To Haley Booksellers as well.
Hold up your book again, Alafair, because my copy just fell on the floor. So hold it up. You all go find me right now. You will love it.
Thank you so much.
Ask your local library to look for their back catalog, and the latest novels from both authors, Her Perfect Life and Find Me, are available through Haley Booksellers online. So thank you to all the libraries for taking part tonight. Thanks to Dick Haley, and of course to Hank and Alafair. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.